As the Vatican prepares to choose the next pope, Stacey Mictry has been talking to one of the American cardinals attending the conclave. Stacey is joining us from Rome. Stacey, who have you been talking to?
Boston.